Howdy, 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 my name is Nashi Sasuke, and welcome back to the Warhammer 40K Wiki. It was not my intention for the only content I made this week to be two Warhammer videos. That wasn't my intention last week either. But this week, the weather decided that my lungs aren't gonna work, so today's about the first time this week that I woke up and I could breathe. So I decided to do that. Now, as far as the Warhammer playlist goes, I might change it so that instead of it being the Warhammer 40K Wiki playlist, it's just the Warhammer playlist, like what I was doing with the backrooms before I stopped doing the backrooms because people were pushing a little bit harder than I wanted to deal with. So what I might do is I might start moving the Warhammer game videos I've already done out of the Let's Try playlist and into the Warhammer playlist. I don't know if I'll be coming back for any of them once they're in there. I might, if anybody wants to see more of any of the ones I've done, or will do. But I realized that much like with why the SCP Wiki playlist exists, I should probably start reading about the things that I'm going to be encountering in the games. And since I just was reminded that I have Space Hulk Deathwing, I don't know anything about Tyranids, so we're going to do that next. Alright, it's a long playlist. It's a long page as per usual. And eventually I might try to find a better Warhammer 40K wiki than this to read this stuff on, because I do not like this website. I don't like fandoms anything. I have to use Opera GX just to be able to stomach this website. But anyway, there's a cancer eating at the Imperium. With each decade it advances deeper, leaving drained, dead worlds in its wake. This horror, this abomination, has thought and purpose which functions on an unimaginable galactic scale, and all we can do is try to stop the swarms of bioengineered monsters it unleashes upon us by instinct. We have given the horror a name to salve our fears. We call it the Tyranid race, but if it is aware of us at all, it must know us only as prey. Inquisitor Bronislaw Savak at the Conclave of Har. Symbol used by the Imperium of Man to designate Tyranid hive fleets. So if they're only called Tyranids because humanity calls them that, what do they call themselves? Do they call themselves anything? Did they just decide to roll with being called Tyranids? Alright, well, the Tyranids are an extragalactic composite species of hideous insectoid Xenos. They actually comprise of an entire spacefaring ecosystem comprised of innumerable different bioforms, which are all variations of the same genetic theme. They are unlike any other intelligent species encountered by humanity. They are the ultimate predators. To them, all living things, from the lowliest insect to the most advanced starfaring civilization, are mere prey. Only now are the inhabitants of the galaxy realizing the scale of the threat. Unless the Tyranids can be stopped, it will mean nothing less than the extinction of all life. The Tyranid species is ultimately dedicated solely to its own survival, propagation, and evolutionary advancement. The Tyranids collectively form a monstrous superorganism that travels across the universe in their great hive fleets of biomechanical hive ships, systematically consuming all other biomatter to enable their own rapid evolution and reproduction. Variant Imperial icon used for identifying Tyranid hive fleet activity. The Tyranids are likened to a galactic swarm, consuming everything in its path, feeding on entire worlds and leaving only dead husks in their wake. Like locusts or churchgoers on Sunday afternoon. Their threat is such that an unprotected planet can be infested and stripped clean of all its organic material in a matter of solar weeks, without even slowing down to advance the hive fleet. The advance of the hive fleet. All Tyranid organisms are synaptic, which is psychically reactive, and each Tyranid creature within a hive fleet shares and contributes to a communal hive mind, which allows the trillions of beings comprising the Tyranid hive fleets to communicate and organize instantaneously on a staggering scale. So shouldn't that mean they have a really, like, a large presence in the warp? Because hive mind? I don't know. The mentality of the Tyranid approach to warfare can be described with the phrase, quantity has a quality all its own. From the lowly Ripper to the deadly Hive Tyrant and beyond, the signature of the Tyranid species is that they overwhelm their foes with sheer numbers, reproducing massive numbers on highly virulent I know how to read. Organisms in record time from the biochemical soup that they derive from the biospheres of the worlds they consume. And it says here, When the Tyranid hive fleets clash with the Daemons of Chaos, neither race is granted succor. The inconstant warp stuff from which daemons are made offers the Tyranids no sustenance, while the unknowable alien entity of the hive mind is immune to terror and demonic corruption. Thus, these two super predators instead battle for the right to consume or despoil the galaxy's vast stocks of mortal flesh, tearing each other apart in a frenzy of unsurpassed slaughter from which only one can emerge victorious. Okay, so their hive mind protects them from the warp and demons don't like that. Got it. The components of a Tyranid hive fleet travel almost exclusively in large groups known as swarms, that possess specialized biomechanical creatures for destroying and consuming a wide variety of prey life forms. The Tyranids have evolved sophisticated methods for facilitating genetic transfer across species boundaries. As a result, a significant goal of any Tyranid invasion is acquisition of useful new biological traits from other life forms. These are used by the hive mind to enhance the Tyranids' effectiveness in consuming new worlds, to gain more of the necessary organic raw materials for further reproduction and directed evolution. All Tyranids are reproduced by a single highly intelligent female bioform known as the Norn Queen. Alright. A hive fleet's Norn Queens are the most important Tyranids within the fleet, for if they are injured or killed, the Tyranids cannot reproduce their numbers from the captured biomass. As a result, Norn Queens can be found only at the heart of the largest and most well-defended Tyranid hive ships. So is there a reason y'all can't just use Exterminatus on their hive ships, like you do planets? Have y'all tried that? I feel like y'all should have tried that. Alright, so for the history we got Tyrannic Wars, the devastation of Baal, the Era Indomitus, and then there's the Great Devourer, Tyranid Combat Doctrine, Biomechanical War Machines, Invasion Progression, Species, Forces, and then it comes down to the stuff we don't really need to know anymore about. Videos, game history, trivia. Those don't matter. To me, at least. Alright, so, the Tyrannic Wars! The Tyranids are not native to the galaxy. They have journeyed across the unspeakable cold of the void, where time and space conspire to hold stars apart with inconceivable distances. Yet the Tyranids crossed this expanse nonetheless, moving through the empty darkness for countless millennia to reach the rim of the galaxy. Who can say for sure what could compel an entire species to make such a venture? Didn't y'all just spend several paragraphs saying that their only goal is to eat and grow? I think you answered your own question. Perhaps the Tyranids have already consumed everything worth in their home galaxy and must find new feeding grounds or starve. Tyranid hive fleet incursions into the Milky Way galaxy circa 998 of the 41st. It's possible that the Tyranids have been preying on galaxies since time immemorial, and this is but the latest to fuel their predations. Some have even speculated that the Tyranids are in flight from an even greater threat, be it a cosmic disaster or other fearsome alien threat, and have risked the nothingness between galaxies rather than face extinction. Whatever the truth, for the Tyranids to have endured such a voyage must have required utter single-mindedness and an unimaginable energy. During their journey, the Tyranids slumbered in a state of frozen hibernation, but now they have arrived. They have awoken, and they are hungry. The first recorded contact between the Imperium and the Tyranids places their appearance in the eastern fringes of the galaxy 745 of the 41st. However, it is rumored that the Ordo Xenos of the Inquisition had identified possible appearances of this species as far back as the 35th millennium. The Xenos emerged from the intergalactic space of the local group of galaxies, their hive mind drawn to the Milky Way by the psychic beacon of the Astronomicon, transmitted by the Emperor's presence in the warp from Terra. More things that are the fault of his existence. The first officially recorded contact with the Tyranids for the Imperium of Man came during a Tyranid attack on an ocean world called Tyran. Is that why they're called Tyranids? And from there, the Hive Fleet Behemoth continued directly towards the center of the galaxy, consuming all the worlds in its path. The Tyranids were... So is that planet called Tyran, or is it called Tyran? Which would mean, are they called Tyranids? Like tyrants? The Tyranids were defeated, barely, by the efforts of the Ultramarines chapter of the Space Marines, because of course it was, during the Battle of Macragge, although the Ultramarines suffered devastating losses that would take centuries to replace. Dang. In 942 of the 41st, Commissar Caiaphas Kane, possibly Caiaphas Kane, while on a mission on the ice world of that place, discovered hibernating Tyranids buried deep in the permafrost. The swarm was apparently carried to the planet by a hive ship that had crashed 7 millennia earlier, prior to any human colonization. Members of the swarm, and subsequently the hive mind, were awakened, but the swarm was eventually defeated. However, the Inquisition was unsettled by the fact that the Tyranids had developed a presence in the galaxy, possibly before even the start of the Age of the Imperium. It is not known whether the crashed bioship was on a scouting mission when it was lost, was a casualty in a pre-Imperial Tyranid invasion force that was defeated by unknown adversaries, or part of a plan by a Tyranid superintelligence that may have seeded the galaxy with many such slumbering broods. In 993 of the 41st, the Tyranids returned to the galaxy with Hive Fleet McCracken, not McCracken, just Kraken, which, I don't know where I got McCracken from, which, instead of assaulting its targets as a single-massed Hive Fleet, split into countless smaller fleets, each developing whole star systems before reinforcements could arrive. The brunt of this new attack was borne by the Space Marines chapter known as the Scythes of the Emperor and the Lamenters. The former chapter was almost completely destroyed. Though the backbone of the Hive Fleet was broken by its defeats at the Battle of Iker IV and at the Aldari craft world Ienden, the cost of the Imperium was still great, and many splinter fleets broke off from the Kraken to later wreak havoc deep within Imperial space, even reaching as far as the fringes of the Tau Empire, which we've already read about. I'm not clicking that. Only a few Terran years later, in 997 41st, Hive Fleet Leviathan unexpectedly appeared from below the plane of the galaxy on the Z-axis and attacked from 2 points, cutting off large portions of the galaxy from reinforcements. Just as it seemed the defenses of the Segmentum Solar and perhaps Terra itself would be tested, the Tyranids were distracted by being deflected into the star system of the powerful Orc Empire of Octarius and the Octarius Sector, and of the Segmentum Ultima. While the Orcs managed to stall the main Tyranid Hive Fleet's advance in what has become known as the Octarian War, tendrils of the Leviathan have already begun to re-emerge from these battles, victorious and stronger than ever after having absorbed potent Orcoid genetic material into their own genetic pool. Oh no! The devastation of Baal. Also, I'll probably be covering the Orcs next, because they are as far as I know, the Orcs are the main threat of the first Space Marines game, and the Tyranids are the major threat of the second one. I have the first one, and I want the second one, so I do need to know about both these races. Anyway, in the final days of the 41st millennium, the bulk of the Hive Fleet Leviathan moved to consume Baal, the home world of the Blood Angels chapter. The Blood Angels called a gathering of their successor chapters, most of whom sent forces to aid the defense of their Primarch's adopted home. But the sheer size of the Leviathan fleet threatened to overwhelm all the Sons of Sanguinius. As the Great Rift tore open reality, warp storms ravaged the Baal system even as its worlds faced the Leviathan. Upon Baal itself, the battle between Blood Angels and Tyranids raged on, but the vast Leviathan fleet orbiting the planet was pulled apart by the empyric storms and devoured by the madness of the warp. Daemons invaded the moon of Baal Prime, annihilating a great portion of the Leviathan's invasion swarms. They were led by Kabanta, the ancient nemesis of the Blood Angels, who had determined that he, and he alone, would be responsible for the destruction of the Blood Angels. The Bloodthirster slaughtered the entire Tyranid host upon Baal Prime, and piled their skulls high in the shape of his dread sigil, leaving a chilling message for his hated foes, before vanishing back into the warp. As the war-spawned insanity of the Great Rift's birth finally began to wane, the principal fleet of the resurrected Primarch, Guilliman's Indomitus Crusade, arrived at Baal, assisting the few surviving Blood Angels in the extermination of the isolated Tyranid ground forces. Baal was saved during the campaign, remembered as the devastation of Baal, but at the cost of almost the entire Blood Angels chapter. This sounds like it's probably at least one of the novels. Probably. If it is one of the novels, somebody let me know, because this sounds awesome and I'd like to read it. If anybody's, like, watching who would know. Also, I like how, like, this dude, Kabanja, hates the Blood Angels so much that he rolled up, saved them from the Tyranids, and was like, only me. Only me. And then went back into the warp. Didn't even fight them. Just saved them so he could fight them later. Interesting. Era Indomitus. In the latter days of the 41st millennium, the galaxy-wide cataclysm of the Great Rift tore a ragged wound across real space, signaling the beginning of a new age of darkness, the Era Indomitus of the Age of the Imperium. Further warp storms followed, rippling across the galaxy, spilling the raw matter of chaos into the material realm in ever-increasing quantities. This ongoing corruption of the galaxy spells potential disaster for the hive mind. Tyranid hive fleets require vast stockpiles of organic matter to power their galactic assaults. The mutable, inconsistent, or inconstant psychic energy of chaos provides none of this vital sustenance. With every passing season, more planets and systems are swallowed up by the roiling tide of empiric madness, denying the Tyranids the precious biomass that sustains them. Yet the Tyranid species is defined by its ability to adapt in the face of disaster. The timeless sentience of the hive mind has already developed new organisms and hunting patterns in the face of this peril. In the wake of its defeat at Bale, the remainder of Hive Fleet Leviathan launched a vast offensive along the southern border of the Segmentum Solar. As Leviathan pushed ever further towards Holy Terra, Primarch Guilliman has dispatched dozens of newly founded Primaris Marine chapters to the front lines of the Third Tyrannic War. The Great Devourer, and it says Tyranid Hormogonts on the prowl. That looks like the only kind of Tyranid I've ever seen. The Tyranids are actually an extragalactic species, as we've read, born somewhere beyond the void that separates the galaxies of the local group. I saw that as local soup. At first, Tyranid hive fleets travel through space by using gigantic organisms genetically engineered to fly through a vacuum known as hive ships, which move in groups which can be likened to a very large Terran locust swarms. They travel in great fleets of gigantic living creatures that serve as spacecraft, each of which is home to countless lesser Tyranid organisms grown in the bubbling organ sacs of the vessel's reproductive chambers. Gross. All of these creatures are born to serve the single entity that is the hive ship, and the ship itself exists only as a part of the entity that is the hive fleet. Typically, hive fleets move in ad hoc formations known as tendrils, migrating to nearby inhabited planets after consuming all the biological and organic material on a recently invaded planet and breeding, often reproducing many times their original number. When a hive fleet encounters a prey world, it does not invade for territorial gain or out of a sense of pride or vengeance. Indeed, it is doubtful the Tyranid hive mind even comprehends such concepts. Rather, they invade to harvest valuable biomass and feed their insatiable hunger. The Tyranids required an endless supply of food, not only to nourish the hive fleets, but to grow new organisms. Therefore, when a hive fleet invades a planet rich in life, every action of every Tyranid creature is honed to a single goal: the total and rapid absorption of that world's organic population, ecosystems, and bioresources. To this end, the hive fleet creates an army with the express purpose of overcoming the prey world's defenders before it is stripped of every scrap of biomatter and devoured. Hive fleets travel at luminal speed, though they never enter the warp. Instead, by using the specialized psychic power of a selectively evolved hive ship called a Narval, they manipulate the gravity fields of star systems to achieve faster than light travel. The massive warp presence of the Tyranid hive mind, however, manifests itself in that realm through the shadow and the warp phenomenon. The current collection of Tyranid hive fleets have migrated to the Milky Way galaxy, presumably after overpopulating or overfeeding in other nearby galaxies of the local group. Given that each of the different Tyranid hive fleets has approached the Milky Way from a different direction, this may imply that the Tyranids have consumed a disturbingly large number of nearby galaxies. Alright, let's see what that's about. The shadow and the warp, this is in, so it looks like it was going to be in Tyranid technology. Is a psychic phenomenon generated by the Tyranid hive mind that blocks all connections to the immaterium in the local space around a hive fleet, making psychic communications or the manifestation of psychic abilities extremely difficult. This unique phenomenon greatly affects astropaths, navigators, and psychic species such as the Eldari. The coming of a Tyranid hive fleet is preceded by a smothering psychic signal similar to white noise that envelops entire star systems and disrupts all form of warp travel and communication. Swallowed up by psychic static, whole worlds suddenly go deathly silent, giving no clues as to what is unfolding on the surface below or of what terrors are about to befall. This is the shadow and the warp, and it heralds imminent invasion and horror. An Imperial sanctioned psyker experiencing the full terror of the shadow of the warp's mind effect of its effect. Dang. It is unknown if the shadow in the warp is created deliberately by the hive fleets or if it is simply a byproduct of the hive mind's innate synaptic control of the species' bioforms. In any case, the shadow in the warp creates fear and panic wherever it falls, instilling a pervasive dread into the minds of a prey world's defenders, plunging entire planets into misery and despair. For highly psychic races such as the Eldari, or for luckless psychers of any intelligent race caught within this enervating effect, the malaise is magnified tenfold. Should a psyker attempt to use their otherworldly abilities, the cerebral cacophony worsens even further. The psychic sound of a billion alien thoughts scratch at their mind, and unless they are particularly strong-willed, they will be pitched into an insanity where they will repeatedly utter phrases in a tongue too alien to properly pronounce. For such races as humanity, whose means of interstellar communication and travel rely upon highly specialized psychers such as astropaths and navigators, the Shadow and the Warp is one of the deadliest facets of the Tyranid menace. Bereft of their means to call for reinforcements or safely navigate surrounding space, worlds of the Imperium of Man under assault by Tyranids are easily isolated from the wider galaxy. This means that, by the time the Shadow and the Warp falls, it is already too late. These beleaguered planets are effectively on their own. They must fend for themselves and face the Tyranid swarm with the weapons they have on hand or die in the attempt. Damn. The Hive Fleets. Tyranids are a spaceborne species that have inveigled their way into the realms of mankind, as well as those of other Xenos, like a disease spreading through a healthy body. Tyranid hive fleets consist of millions of biomechanical craft, each serving as host to an untold number of symbiotic organisms. These creatures evolve and spawn from a variety of geno-organisms in their ship's reproductive chambers. All these creatures are born to service the ship, and the ship in turn exists only to service the needs of the hive fleet. Whereas other armies like those of the Imperium and the Tau fight for conquest or self-defense, and the forces of chaos and the Orc tribes battle merely for the chance to wreak violence and havoc, the Tyranid hive fleets are driven by the will of the hive mind, which itself is motivated by the most ineradicable instinct inherent to all life forms, reproduction, and through reproduction and the acquisition of new genetic traits, evolution to a better adapted form. A fully mobilized Tyranid hive fleet strikes shock, awe, and terror into even the most stalwart of humanity's defenders. Even when the Xenos threat is eliminated at great cost, it will not be long before another Tyranid migration emerges to take advantage of the situation. This is what makes the Tyranid species such a threat. It is an evolved meta-predator capable of outproducing, outconsuming, and outlasting all other species it encounters, having done so on a disquietingly unknowable number of prior occasions across a vast swath of intergalactic space. Down here it says a gigantic Tyranid Carniflex tears into an Imperial transport vehicle. Oh god! The Hive Mind. The Magos Biologists of the Imperium categorizes each Tyranid hive fleet as a separate force, an individual entity that competes with other hive fleets for resources. Indeed, each is self-sufficient, appearing to exhibit different strategies and developing unique creatures to overcome its prey. However, the truth is more complex, for each hive fleet is but a splinter of one greater assemblage. The Tyranids' numbers are vast beyond counting, swarms so large that they block out the very stars, yet each and every creature is but a single cell in the living body of a single superorganism. Every thought and action, every spark of life in the Tyranid species is bound and interlinked into a single, unfathomable consciousness, a great entity that stretches across hundreds of light years of space. Gestalt sentience is known as the hive mind. It holds all Tyranids in a psychic bond that enables them to act together in perfect unison. Under the influence of this ancient consciousness, the Tyranids have fed on countless planets and devoured intelligent civilizations since time immemorial. The majority of Tyranid organisms have no distinct minds as a human would understand it, having been created to perform a single task to the exclusion of all else. Unless the implacable will of the hive mind instructs them to do otherwise, these organisms simply fulfill the functions for which they were created, acting on nothing more than instinct. Larger, more complicated Tyranid bioforms have been grown to make limited decisions appropriate to the current stimuli and situations, but even these actions are subordinate to the goals of the hive mind. The hive mind's influence is strongest in the vicinity of creatures such as Tyranid warriors and the feared hive tyrants. These beings are able to communicate with their kin, not through language, but by a synaptic form of telepathy through which they relay and channel the will of the hive mind. Under the command of such creatures, the Tyranids operate in a perfect unison, enslaved to the psychic imperatives of a single communal intelligence. However, should these synapse creatures be slain, the link between individual creatures and the hive mind will be severed. Many of the lesser organisms will revert to their baser animalistic behaviors. For this reason, the Tyranid swarms do not have only a single commander, but many to ensure the hive mind's synaptic control is maintained across the entire Tyranid species. I already read about the Shadow and the Warp, but it looks like it's more here. Smothering Psychic. Hails. Okay, no, I read that. The superorganism. All Tyranids possess a common psychic bond known as the synapse. This bond enables the Tyranid swarms to think, perceive, and act as a single great superorganism, providing near seamless coordination and control within a Tyranid invasion force so numerous and extensive as to be completely uncontrollable otherwise. From the smallest feeder organisms to the microbes that decompose new biomass, from the sessile and rooted flora-like forms to the huge tendril-like shoals of the hive fleets, every Tyranid organism has a place within the will of the hive mind. The lesser and smaller Tyranid creatures are mindless and instinctive animals, plants and bacteria performing functions with no conscious oversight or commitment, while larger and more complex creatures can make decisions appropriate to the situation and form an integral, if minuscule, part of the hive mind's distributed sentient awareness. The synaptic web. Functioning in perfect unison, coordinated by powerful psychic imperatives transmitted through the Tyranid communal sentience that is the hive mind, Tyranid fleets, swarms, and broods do not have a singular command structure, but rather form a synaptic web of psychic influence and feedback. Situated within this entangled web are specialized synapse creatures, whose slightly more advanced brains function as psychic routers, buses, and hubs, coordinating and policing the riotous cacophony of the collective brain power of a mass organism that is sometimes larger than most planets. Without the localized control provided by these organisms, the swarm can quickly falter, and some Tyranid creatures may revert to animalistic behaviors when individual will and situational instincts come into conflict. Often, swarms will subdivide into smaller packs of creatures, still capable of consensual behavior among themselves. These synapse creatures that channel the commands of the hive mind are mostly, if not all, potent individual psychers. How any of this is done without drawing the attention of countless demons of chaos or the other psychic predatory entities of the warp into the midst of the Tyranid swarm is unknown and possibly unknowable to the humans of the Imperium. The Narval. Tyranid hive fleets do not travel through the warp like Imperial starships. Yet, the hive fleet's incredibly fast rate of advance into the galaxy belies the argument made by some that they do not possess a mode of faster than light travel. Whilst it is true that the Tyranids are forced to remain at sublight speeds while within the gravitic boundaries of a planetary system, they are capable of superluminal velocities when traveling through interstellar space. This capability is the result of a small Tyranid bioship classified by the savants of the Imperium of Man as a Narval. Unlike most Tyranid bioships, the Narval is almost completely defenseless and possesses almost no bioweaponry and only a very thin protective carapace. A cluster of monofilament spines on the Narval's bow allow it to take in a wide variety of sensory input, including a broad spectrum of gravimetric and electromagnetic signals. Using these sensors, the Narval can detect new planetary systems at extreme interstellar distances. In some unknown manner, it then makes use of the origin star system's own gravity and creates a compressed space-time transit corridor through which the Narval and the other Tyranid bioships can traverse interstellar distances. This form of space warping travel cannot be used near strong gravitational sources as they overwhelm the Narval's hypersensitive navigational sensors. As a result, a Tyranid hive fleet must use more conventional forms of biologically induced reaction-based propulsion during the final approach to a new star system, which can slow their arrival by Terran years or even entire solar decades. Whilst this form of propulsion is ultimately slower than a reliance upon the warp drive, it is a great deal more reliable and allows the Tyranids to move slowly, if implacably, across the galaxy. However, the Narval's manipulation of a star system's gravity does sometimes produce unintended side effects. A destination world can suffer from earthquakes, solar flares, tidal waves, and other natural disasters produced during the interval during which the Hive Fleet is in transition through the space-time transit corridor. This chaos only further benefits the Tyranid invasion, however, as the defenders of the target world will have their resources bound up in dealing with these problems when the swarm finally arrives in orbit and the first mycetic spores begin to fall. Alright, so not only does the arrival of the Tyranid shut down anything psychic-related, it also causes natural disasters. Jeez. Looks like we're about halfway through the article. How long is the combat doctrine? I think I can stop at the Tyranid combat doctrine and pick up from there. If I'm halfway, a little bit less than halfway through, I'll read a little bit more. Right, it looks like I'm at the part that I wanted to know about. So, Tyranids often attempt to first conquer a planet through subterfuge and infiltration. Space Hulks and other derelict spacecraft are infested with gene stealers, which quickly familiarize themselves with the layout of their new home, then enter hibernation. When the Hulk is eventually discovered by Imperial authorities, the gene stealers attack the exploration crew, sometimes killing some crew members, but always leaving at least one survivor who is implanted with a seed, a form of gene stealer reproductive virus that contains specially engineered Tyranid DNA. This infestation is never fatal, but instead the virus's genetic material subtly alters the victim's DNA, producing in them a strong urge to mate created by the stimulation of the individual's sex hormones. The gene stealer's DNA will be incorporated into the host germ cells, and so any child that results from this union will be a gene stealer hybrid, which now has the complete loyalty of its parents through a psychic bond. The hybrids continue to breed and multiply among the population of the host species, eventually forming a gene stealer cult. As the cult grows in numbers, it begins to spread its influence throughout the planet's political and social structure, placing its members in positions of power within the government and the military. At the same time, the cult's hybrid members, united by a smaller psychic gestalt known as the Broodmine, begin to emit a collective psychic signal through the warp that acts as a beacon for the approaching Tyranid hive fleet. As the hive fleet nears the doomed world, the Gene Stealer cult, potentially numbering in the millions by this point, goes into action, instigating a worldwide rebellion with the goal of weakening the planet's defenses against the approaching hive fleet. The hive fleet will also seed the planet with numerous Tyranid organisms, which will begin to biologically alter the planet's climate, surface, and ecosystems to make it easier to consume. If the hive fleet is victorious, the fleet will descend to the planet, inhaling the atmosphere, drinking the seas, and basically consuming all organic biomass until nothing more than a lifeless ball of rock remains. On the battlefield, Tyranid tactics are based around the notion of superior numbers, as they generally try to outnumber the enemy 50-1. Tyranids overrun opposition in close combat, closing faster than most armies. They possess few ranged weapons, but their sheer numbers and close combat specialization makes up for the slaughter if they are led by a capable commander. The Tyranids do not communicate with the other intelligent species, and why should they do so? Tyranids are as far as above other life forms such as humanity, just as humanity is above the domesticated livestock it consumes. The Tyranid cannot be reasoned with, appeased, or surrendered to. There can be no hope of mercy from such a foe. To face the Tyranids is simply a matter of survival, kill or be consumed. Vast swaths of the galaxy have already been stripped of life, and with every passing Terran year, the hive fleets push deeper into reaches of populated space. Even as the prey races direct their forces to repel these threats, still more Tyranid fleets approach from the intergalactic void and emerge from their aeons-long slumbers. The thought processes of the hive mind are gathering pace as more Tyranids wake and recall the age-old purpose of their kind: feed, grow, survive, and evolve. Alright, so, the reason I'm glad that I read through that before stopping at the war machines is because when I was reading up on just reading the description of Space Hulk Deathwings, I was wondering why it was saying Gene Stealers when it was very clearly Tyranids. So I asked my friend who plays Tyranids in the tabletop what the difference was. And they said that Gene Stealers are Tyranids, but I didn't really get much more than that. So now that I know the difference between a Gene Stealer and a Tyranid is that the Gene Stealers essentially are Tyranids that turn people into more Tyranids? And it sounds like the reason there's just a subset of games called Space Hulk is because they are specifically about dealing with Gene Stealers? I now understand. But I'm going to stop this episode here because these articles are really long, and with the exception of the Slanesh one, it makes more sense to do them in two parts than to try to inhale the whole thing in one shot. So, this has been Anachi Sasuke. This was the first half of reading about the Tyranids of the Warhammer 40K Wiki. Like I said at the beginning of the episode, I'm probably going to restructure the playlist to just be the Warhammer playlist. That way I have somewhere to put the games the Warhammer 40K wiki, and also when I eventually start reading the Warhammer Fantasy stuff to get more information about the Chaos Gods, because it sounds like there's way more information about the Chaos Gods in the Fantasy one than there is in 40K, and I would like to know more about that. But if you liked it, like and subscribe will be groovy. If you didn't, you need to do either one of those things. If you want to click the bell, you can do that as well so that you're notified of future uploads. And I will see y'all in the next one. Later.